right, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Elections Weekly. Happy to be back this week for you guys. This week we've got, as usual, Dylan Wade and Joe Szymanski, and we've got some interesting topics to go over this week. Surprising week, surprising day in politics, as you all know. So basically, on our docket, we're going to be discussing the recent debacle in Minnesota's 2nd Congressional District, some of the new polling that's come out recently, and briefly go over some of the Supreme Court stuff that's been going on. So I guess we'll start off with this whole Minnesota 2 debacle. So the Marijuana Reform Now Party, which is a major party in Minnesota, thanks to winning a certain amount of the vote in the Attorney General race.
Auditor
race, sorry. Their candidate died. And apparently under Minnesota law, what this means is there will be no general election for a representative for Minnesota's 2nd Congressional District. What's instead going to happen is that the people will have the ballots and they'll be cast, but no ballots will be counted. And instead we'll have a special election in February. So for some reason, they're going to be a couple months late in having a House representative from the 2nd Congressional District. This law doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. It was created after the death of Paul Wellstone, presumably to give Democrats and Republicans a better opportunity to have an election if something like that happens. But I don't think anyone conceived that the Legal Marijuana Now Party had to be a major party, and that this would result in the end of an election. Practical considerations are the general conventional wisdom, given this just happened, seemed to be that this could maybe help the Republicans a little bit, because this would be after the election. So it would be the first, assuming Joe Biden wins, which he's favored to win, this would be the first House election after the presidential election. So Republicans could, in theory, win the swing seat, which Trump did win last time, if I recall right. But it's just a very strange situation overall. So what are your guys' thoughts on what is unfolding in this saga over there?
So I have a lot of conspiracy theories about this, but I think it just kind of boils down to this is what happens when you let states make their own election laws. You get really bizarre things like this, where a candidate who probably wasn't going to get above 5% of the vote has now thrown the entire delegation into a bit of chaos. And if the dominoes fall exactly right, potentially swings the presidential election.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah, because that's a factor here, because Minnesota has 8 congressional districts currently. It's 5-3. If Colin Peterson wins and no one else loses, which is a predictable outcome, it'd be 4-4. In the event of a split electoral college vote, that means it goes to the House and the delegations vote, which means that if there's no representative for the 2nd district, it goes from a 5-3 Democratic advantage to a 4-3, if I recall right. Yeah, mm-hmm. Republican advantage, which means Republicans could swing Minnesota because a House election was held. There are actually people who are insisting Democrats were not happy this guy was on the ballot. They thought he was a Republican plant. That's just typically the charge whenever there's one third party on the ballot, and it's typically associated with an issue. And so the charge was that this was a plant candidate from the right, but given he's dead, that doesn't seem to be an impact at this point. The entire situation is strange. I mean,
yeah, might I just say, if he was a plant, this was some real 4D chess.
This is like 8-dimensional chess, if that's the case.
This is some crazy level stuff.
I mean, obviously it is very sad this guy died, but there was also no chance he was going to be winning the seat. That's the problem here, is that you're canceling a race for like a guy that was going to win like maybe at most 5% in a good year. Like, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, this is just another one of those things that feels like it keeps happening in 2020, right? It just keeps happening in 2020. Everything's just random. And not only that, I don't know why all the fun stuff has to happen in seats where I interview candidates. Mm-hmm. I interviewed the GOP candidate for this district, Tyler Kistner, back in July. And now suddenly neither him nor Angie Craig would be seated in November. I mean, we have this seat rated as likely Democrat. Craig is a very good candidate for this seat. She's kind of got the exact type of background that you need. But now suddenly this throws everything into a real conundrum here, specifically because obviously it's just kind of right after the election. That's not terrible for the Democrats. You could certainly argue if it was a couple months later, say like in March or like in April or May, this would probably be worse for them. Just because that's a little bit more after the election. You know, the Biden administration will have a little bit more time to be doing things. But I think this does at least shift the race a little bit. It's going to be happening in the middle of February. You're going to certainly probably expect to see lower turnout in that case. I would think in a district like this, theoretically, that would probably help the Republican Party. I think that is something that is fair to say. And I think it's fair to say, too, Tyler Kistner is not a terrible candidate. He is not a bad fit for the district by any means. He is a young former Marine, is a young family, just from the area. That's a guy who can do stuff for Republicans in a suburban seat that is trending away from them.
And wasn't he actually outraising Craig for a while, or at least
he
last
did
cycle?
outraise Angie Craig in the third quarter, which is kind of why I took a look at the seat, because it's like, hey, this guy just suddenly outraised an incumbent. Nobody really expected that. So Kistner's not a terrible candidate, and I would actually argue he probably fits the district better than former Congressman Jason Lewis did, who was one of the former conservative talk radio host guys, very socially conservative. Kind of got lucky in 2016 in this seat. So I would certainly argue that Kistner might even be a better fit than Lewis was for this seat. So it's going to be really interesting now. I think it's definitely a seat that's going to have to come onto the radar now. I certainly wouldn't label the seat a toss-up yet, but I would certainly potentially now change my rating to it for leans Democrat, just because now we're going to have to see it forced into a special. For now, I mean, of course, lawsuits and things, that could change everything. But for now, if we're going to see this race go into a special, for me, that makes it a leans Democrat race now, because that throws a lot of things in the wiring. That makes a lot more things less sure. And, it's certainly going to be one to watch that we have right after the election.
Yeah, it's definitely something no one was expecting. I think they're going to probably change this law, I would assume, after this whole debacle, because really, I don't think anyone wanted this. I don't think any of the candidates were like, you know what? I like this move. I think we should do this. Like, because even if they win, they're going to lose several months they could have spent getting on committees, building up, relations. They'll be a couple months behind all the other freshman congressmen or congresswomen or representatives, whatever term you prefer. But also the district will be out representation for a few months. And honestly, like, they're going to be, they're still holding the election. They're just not telling you who won. Like, that's the weird thing. Like, they're going to count all the votes. They're not taking the names off the ballots. They're just not counting the votes, and they're not going to name who would have won. It's a very odd situation.
Which, if I'm not mistaken, this law was put in after Paul Wellstone died.
Yeah.
But the way you're describing it does not fix the issue that was caused by Wellstone's death.
It doesn't.
You're simply delaying the results, that doesn't fix the problem.
Yeah, it's a very strange. It honestly doesn't make any sense.
No, it's very interesting that this has happened for sure. I wouldn't have certainly expected it. I don't think anyone was going to expect this to happen in a House race.
Always expected. It's 2020.
Always expect the unexpected in politics, right? Always expect the unexpected. But it's certainly really interesting to watch. It's certainly really interesting to see. So it's gonna be one to watch now. I don't think this is a seat, like I said, that was on anyone's targets, but now it's gonna come on the dashboard now as something that I think both parties are going to probably want to put money into, and something that both parties might want to spend into, just because of how weird it's going to be.
Yeah, this is a district. Obviously, this is a district in the Minneapolis area, Twin Cities, southern suburbs of southern and kind of eastern suburbs of Minneapolis. It's a narrow Trump district. It's not. It's one that's kind of shuffled back and forth historically between parties in terms of who's won.
It's one that'll probably flip to Biden.
Yeah, it wouldn't be surprising. It was only a Trump by 2 seat, and it's obviously suburban. Although given Trump's strength, doing all right in Minnesota, he's probably doing better there than Wisconsin, I'd say at this point. But even still, it's an unusual situation. I would think it would probably be. I'd rather be in the situation Kistner in terms of who this benefits more,
Mhm.
but I don't know if it's enough to win the seat.
No.
But the thing is, it's also competitive. I mean, if we already know it's Biden presidency, Republicans may be more motivated to turn out, especially in a February low turnout election. So, who knows?
Yeah, though if this is the first domino to a 269 electoral college, may I just say that's perfect for 2020?
Yeah.
There's nothing
year.
more. Yeah, there's nothing that would annoy everyone, including myself, more than that, and that's very on brand.
Yeah. And to be fair, neither candidate has come out and said anything about the election about this other than obviously that they're sorry for Adam Weeks, who was the candidate, and his family, which is probably a good move on their part. I expect there will be lawsuits about this because it's arguably unconstitutional. I mean, to just say we're not going to certify the winner, not because of fraud or because of anything else, just because we don't want to. The law says we've just decided we're not going to certify races where a candidate dies within 79 days of the election. It's a pretty arbitrary cutoff, all things considered. I mean, there are better alternatives, right? I mean, you had Missouri, where you had Mel Carnahan died, and his wife ran in his place. That makes, and was appointed governor, I believe, after the fact. That makes more sense than something like this, where they're just like, election canceled, sorry. Like, what if this is a gubernatorial election? Like, what happens then? I mean, this doesn't make any sense.
No, I want to talk to whoever wrote this law, because I need to know what they were thinking.
It's so flawed in so many ways that should have been thought of ahead of time. Like, obviously, the entire point was that if a major candidate dies, the race is going to change. I guess they set the threshold too low. Maybe it should have been 15%. I know that's past the point where the Independence Party typically was getting. They were getting, anywhere from 10 to 15% in a lot of these races. But this is a problem I have. One election does not make you a major party. Getting 5% of the vote in like one random election doesn't mean you're better than any other minor party or any major party for that matter. Maybe it's the major minor party distinguishing here. I don't know. It just, the entire thing is boggling. It's mind boggling. Crystal Ball moved the race. They were like, we're moving it to toss up and we're also moving it to vacant. It doesn't. The whole thing is just bizarre.
This isn't a toss-up. It's definitely not.
No, it was a toss-up in the sense that they don't know what the result is going to be.
Oh.
Like we can't rate this race because there's not going to be a race.
I don't know. I feel like they need their own rating for, I don't know, non-applicable?
NAs. Nobody thought of this scenario because, honestly, I don't think anyone other than the person who wrote this law has an idea what this thing is. So, but yeah, I think we've gone about all we can over this. We'll keep you posted. We may put an article out on this if we can get the legal stuff straightened out, because honestly, this doesn't make any sense. All things considered.
Yeah, we have to be missing something.
Yeah, it's very, very strange. But yeah, so in other news, obviously over the weekend, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Supreme Court Justice, passed away. This was unexpected. It's kind of set off a frenzy. And at the moment, what it looks like is that Republicans have the votes to confirm narrowly the justice they appoint is expected to be Amy Coney Barrett, although some in the Rubio camp and in Florida in particular are pushing for Barbara Lagoa. It seems to be Amy Coney Barrett, though. She's the only one that Trump has interviewed. She's been a potential candidate for the last 2 vacancies. She's definitely someone conservatives will like. She's someone who seems to be broadly liked by all conservative factions. You have everyone from Federalist Society, hardcore libertarians who like her stance on
qualified immunity.
Yeah, qualified immunity. She was skeptical of that. You've had social conservatives who like her background, who like that she's not from an Ivy League school, and who think she may be more favorable to them on some social issues. Basically, she seems to be someone who all Republicans will like, and at the same time, Democrats are not inclined really to like her, even to the extent of a Gorsuch or a Kavanaugh, who are certainly more amenable on a judicial level, I would think, to some Democrats. They were certainly picks that were not drawn to be firebrands. Kavanaugh became a rallying point unintentionally Both him and Gorsuch are frankly kind of the Jeb Bushes of the judicial realm. There's not really a whole lot in the record that's severely conservative, for lack of a better term. I mean, obviously they're textualists, they're originalist, but you could see both of them. Yeah.
Sorry, I would actually make the argument. I agree with you on Gorsuch. He's fairly he's non-controversial for a Republican justice. I would make the argument Kavanaugh's somewhere between Firebrand and Gorsuch.
The problem with Kavanaugh is that specifically it's similar like Merrick Garland, right? Where Merrick Garland, ironically, Justice Gorsuch is probably to the left of Garland on a lot of issues of government power. Kavanaugh is more in the Garland camp. So he's someone who, if you're a Democrat who likes executive authority, who likes having more power within the government branch, he's not someone who's going to be hardcore like Gorsuch or Thomas in that regard. So obviously, like with a lot of Republican justices, it's difficult to define narrowly. But what is known for sure is that Amy Coney Barrett would be the most conservative Supreme Court justice probably since at least Scalia, maybe Thomas. That's without a doubt, I would think.
Yeah, I would certainly argue that Amy Coney Barrett would probably be the most conservative justice. I would say for sure, since Clarence Thomas was put on the court. Mm-hmm. I would say that just with her standing and just with her opinions on precedent and certainly within executive power, I would certainly say that she is probably one of the most I would say the most conservative justice that would be nominated to the court since Clarence Thomas. And obviously Thomas himself went through a very rough confirmation hearing. He got through in the end, but we could probably see the same thing here for Amy Coney Barrett. But if it somehow ends up being someone like a Barbara Lagoa, Lagoa, I'm sure would probably be considered much more moderate than Amy Coney Barrett. She would certainly be a little bit more of a wild card, just because, again, like you mentioned, Eric, people have been hyping up Barrett as any potential Republican Supreme Court pick, since the beginning of the Trump administration. She's been someone who's been talked about for a long, long time. It's been known for a long, long time that if there was someone that the Republicans would want to replace Ginsburg, it would be Amy Coney Barrett. Obviously, I don't think this is the time period maybe or the way that they maybe wanted to do that. But this is the way it happened. This is the way it's going to go. It certainly looks very likely once the pick is announced in basically less than 2 days now, if you want to count full hours. But on Saturday when the pick is announced, it certainly looks like whoever it is will be on the court before Election Day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's very little doubt at this point that Republicans will be unable to confirm her, not just because she's broadly popular among Republican factions. I think not even Murkowski at this point has come out and said she doesn't think they should confirm a justice, but she wouldn't be opposed to Amy Coney Barrett on or to any Trump justice on principle. Basically, she doesn't want to vote on a nominee, but if she had to vote on a nominee, she's not necessarily going to vote no. It's about as squishy of a non-answer as you can get.
That's an answer.
College is a confirmed no. College is a confirmed no, as far as I know.
Yeah, that Murkowski answer is the one I would have expected from Collins.
Yeah. Well, Collins, to be fair, people don't realize, people go after her judicial record. Yeah, she's voted for all the Republican justices, but she's also voted for like every Democratic judge and justice ever. Like she just votes for, as long as there's not an ethical problem or some sort of truly extremist problem, she's not going to vote against your nominee, whether you're on the right or left. Obviously, right now, with Republicans in charge, that looks pretty bad for her race in Maine, which is expected to vote for Hillary Clinton. And she's now an underdog in that race, to be sure. Even like Mitt Romney, people were expecting basically the rallying cry, like before with impeachment, was you just need 4 Republicans. If you get 4 Republicans on board, it makes everything easier. Well, they can get maybe 1 at most. That's not enough when you have that 4 vote barrier. And to be honest, like there's, aside from her stances and aside from her religion, which I think, we're already seeing people fall into this trap already, where they're going after her on religious grounds for not even for connection, just for not even understanding the basic tenets of religion. I think I put a running bet in one of my chats as to which news network is going to be the first one to confuse the kingdom of God with a literal physical kingdom instead of a metaphorical, kingdom of all believing Christians or what. Or like I've already put bets up on that. So that's what Republicans are hoping for. Obviously, is rather than going after her record, which would certainly be very conservative, Democrats take the low hanging fruit, which is that she's a practicing Catholic who has a lot of kids and went to a Catholic school. And is involved with organizations that are associated with that. Most seem to not be taking it. I think Mazie Hirono is the most likely to take the bait. But they basically got a public embarrassment, I think, generally speaking, in the last hearing, at least in Republican circles. They would be wise not to repeat that. There are ways that could go after her, especially on issues like abortion. But Republicans are hoping they focus on other things.
Yeah, I don't expect this hearing to actually be all that controversial. I kind of expect that Democrats are adopting the approach now of we can't win this battle, so let's save our political capital for the court packing battle.
Yeah, that may be the case. I mean, even to be fair, the resistance to Gorsuch was mainly just proving to their base that they just opposed him. It wasn't particularly bloody. It wasn't particularly brutal. Aside from doing a filibuster that was doomed to begin with and everyone knew would fail, they really didn't resist his pick at all. Kavanaugh was not being resisted at all until the allegations, unlike Thomas, who was being resisted on ideological grounds before the allegations. So that wouldn't surprise me entirely. It may be the best play, actually, is to just let this go through and to just say, yeah, we let you guys have your justices. Now we're going to appoint 2 because we want 2 justices. Like, I mean, who knows? The court is a wild card at this point. I think it's kind of revealing a problem with the court, which is that it's kind of weird that we're setting it up where octogenarians are just dying before elections, and that's flipping elections. That's really strange. Like, I mean, to even go over people, David Souter is not young, or not David Souter. Stephen Breyer is not a young individual. He's not. I mean, he's been there for. Yeah, he's old. I didn't realize he was that old. But Sonia Sotomayor has diabetes, if I recall right. She has a legitimate health issue. Any of these could cause problems. Clarence Thomas is elderly at this point as well. It's generally been assumed he would retire during a Republican presidency, but it seems like it may be a Ginsburg situation. Where he just kind of holds on until can't hold on anymore. I mean, I'm not in favor of court packing or anything, but there are reasons for people to be concerned about the situation as a whole right now. I wouldn't be surprised if at some point, even on a bipartisan level, retirement ages come up at some point, like a lot of other judges or a lot of other things do, if it's in a situation where it wouldn't hurt either party. That's the problem at the moment, is that any plan at the moment hurts Republicans. The moment that it's politically neutral is when you start getting some adjustments, I think. Yeah,
I think that I'm also not quite sure how I feel about court packing. I think it's more of a when you don't have any good options, you're looking for the least bad.
Yeah. But if the filibuster is the nuclear option, court packing is the thermonuclear option. Like, it's just
Yeah, but I mean, on principle, I don't know how much I love the idea of unelected justices having lifetime appointments and being able to decide every law in the country.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, this is where I hope Democrats ultimately adopt the Republican approach of textualism. There are a lot of textualist judges that are actually liberal. Akhil Amar is a big one. I mean, obviously he's up there, but the tradition of textualism didn't start with a conservative. It goes back to Hugo Black, who was a very liberal justice. That's where a lot of textualists trace their tradition. So if that were to be the case, where we just go to a point where like the idea of this being a super legislature is done, I think this would make these fights a lot less brutal. But at the moment, it's a 6-3 majority we're talking about. Granted, there's been worse Republican appointed majorities before. When David Souter was being appointed, that was 8 of 9 justices that were appointed by Republican presidents. Democrats just got lucky that 3 of them were liberal. Like, they're not that lucky this time. I don't think they have the votes to repeal something like Roe v. Wade. If you look at the decision was put out earlier in the year, only 2 justices were even open to repealing it, which was Gorsuch and Thomas, if I recall right, or Alito and Thomas, one of the 2.
Gorsuch being one would surprise me.
Yeah,
considering his libertarian leanings.
Yeah, I don't think it was Gorsuch. I think it was Alito and
Thomas.
Yeah, and Thomas, obviously. That's 3 votes. I've heard some people even go further and say Griswold is at risk. I would say that's even. I don't think you get a single vote to go against Griswold at this point. Just the can of worms that would open up would be.
Forgive me, Griswold.
Griswold versus Connecticut. That's the case that originated the right to privacy.
Oh, okay.
Not the right to privacy of abortion, but the right to privacy in a generic sense that has since been expanded to other things.
Got it.
Like birth control, like abortion, but also search and seizure, that sort of thing. That's that. And if Amy Coney Barrett's any indication, if that's the type of originalism that what that means, she doesn't support it. She's talked about how true originalism would mean you get rid of West Virginia, you get rid of all sorts of things. And he's like, yeah, that's not realistic. We're not going to do that. So I think there's a degree of pragmatism here.
Yeah, and I feel like any single time, especially in modern history, social media and everything, every time we go through a court battle, you feel like there's this rhetoric. Obviously, it's come from the left a lot because they are the ones, the Republicans are the one who are appointing the justices. But they're going to appoint this justice, and now this is in danger. All these precedents are going to be in danger. But one of the key things for any any person who gets through to the federal court system is that precedent is one of the most taught things to lawyers and to eventual judges. Precedent is very, very important to these people, and I think we've seen it time and time again, even throughout this court, even throughout this year, that certain old cases have taken precedent to other things, and kind of the idea is like all these apparent, all these old 50s and 60s era decided cases are going to go down. I generally believe those fears to be unfounded. I understand if someone like Dylan would be concerned when it would come to, a new case being decided. I could understand maybe some concern there if you would not like, a gun rights case being decided in the way that you would like it to in this day and age. But I generally think the fear over 50, 60-year-old cases that were decided under the Warren Court, I generally think those fears are unfounded because we've seen cases, unless they are inherently racist, the big ones being Dred Scott and Plessy versus Ferguson are the two that we've really seen overturned in this lifetime. Those are the only two really.
Even on the Republican side, the cases that were ruled in favor of, for example, the gun rights case, that was not going over any existing precedent because there was no existing precedent really in the Supreme Court in terms of guns. It was creating a precedent. You look at, for example, the ruling on the Civil Rights Act. That was controversial, but that was also there was no existing single landmark decision. So most of this court has been under Roberts has been existing precedent generally holds. If there's not existing precedent, then he's open to change. Obviously, if he's not the fifth vote anymore, that's a problem, and you start seeing things. I think cases like Kelo versus would become one that might be reviewed. And I think Gorsuch and Thomas in particular would be really interesting in revisiting that one, but that's a recent precedent. That's 2005.
Right.
I really don't think we're going to be revisiting the Warren Court at this point.
No.
The time for that was the 90s, and Republicans failed in the 90s at doing that. So even on abortion, I don't think Roe v. Wade would entirely be repealed. I think you build off of Planned Parenthood versus Casey. Just from a judicial conservative standpoint, Roe v. Wade allowed late-term abortion restrictions, third trimester, generally, in some things. Planned Parenthood versus Casey pushed it to viability as the threshold. I think any case would build off of that precedent and maybe establish it to second-term limits, any sort of other things, but within that framework, right? Because that's what's ultimately been built upon. That's where it's actually trending if you look at the case law, even like the partial birth abortion decision. I can't remember the exact case name at this point, but that was built off of, from Justice Kennedy, off of what he had decided in Planned Parenthood versus Casey. That's what I ultimately think it boils down to is, and I get, for Democrats, it's been a windfall. I think it's up to $200 million, $230 million in ACT Blue money at this point, which is just insane. I mean, I'm not saying that it's a bad thing. I'm saying it's truly phenomenal, the outpouring of sentiment on this, and not just sentiment, cash. I mean, this is certainly going to help people out. I do like on a personal level that people are invested in what the court is deciding at this point, that people are paying more attention to the court, to what its powers are, and to reconsidering even some aspects of it, even if I don't agree with them. I do think this is a branch of government that people deserve to know about. I think a lot of people couldn't tell you all 9 justices on the Supreme Court at the moment. I would hope that would change after this. People realize this is a branch of government and it's important, and you should help. In part, you should decide some of your votes based off of, if you care about these issues, vote on them, because the senators have authority on this. The president has authority on this. If you want things to change, you use your vote. On a personal level, I like that. I like that people are paying more attention now.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I do as well. And I agree that I don't think we're going to be going back to really old precedents and changing things. But as Joe said, yeah, I'm a little more worried about the current precedents that could be set.
Correct. Yeah, the current ones, which there could easily be expansions. You could have expansions off of DC versus Heller to expand to prohibit assault weapons bans. You could have a precedent going off of the right to work decision, maybe extending that into private sector. I think that would be pretty controversial, but you could build off of. That's the sort of stuff you could build off of here.
Yeah, I mean,
and ironically, none of this is stuff that social conservatives are really going to care about. They care about Roe v. Wade and to some degree Obergefell. I don't think either of those are going anywhere, especially Obergefell at this point. Gorsuch is not open to that at all.
No, I believe Roberts was also with Gorsuch on that. I believe it was 6-3. So I don't think that one's flipping. Yeah,
at all. And to some degree, the court does consider, obviously, as a matter of public opinion for some of this stuff. I think you have to go back to the Warren court to find where the court was just doing stuff that a lot of people didn't like at the time. That was just completely out of the political mainstream. Death penalty repeal, some additional criminal justice stuff, even Roe v. Wade to some degree. So as a practical matter, I kind of agree with Joe. It's kind of a little bit overrated in terms of existing precedent, but I absolutely get the concern. And I think it's a good thing people are paying attention to the powers the court has, because it's a lot of power. Judicial review is the ultimate power in this country to some degree. If they decide to rule on something, I mean, short of the state just deciding not to follow it, which we already had a civil war over that, there's not really much recourse there.
Which, again, I think is kind of antithetical to the founders' intent of there being no supreme authority.
Oh, it absolutely was antithetical. But at this point, again, you're not going to be revisiting the J court decisions.
No, I mean, I'm arguing in ideals, not in practice.
I think there's a lot of conservatives who would agree with you on that. I know a lot of conservatives who just they don't like. We've sort of seen this with some of these nationwide stays in circuit courts, where a court in another part of the country issues a nationwide injunction rather over something, when really it should just be either appealed up or it shouldn't even be a federal concern at all. I know conservatives have cared about judicial review, but again, it's not going anywhere. You've literally built up 2 centuries worth at least of precedent based off of this. We're in an English common law system. It doesn't happen like that. You don't just overturn 10 years of precedent, usually, not even 200. I mean,
yeah, no, I totally agree. And honestly, I don't even know if I did more reading, maybe I'd agree that it shouldn't go anywhere, but I don't know.
Yeah, well, that was the J court mostly. That was John Jay mostly asserting his influence as part of what was initially the weakest branch of government. He's like, well, I want to be the strongest one. That was actually the Federalist maintained a degree of authority. He was the only beyond John Adams, he was the only nationwide Federalist of any import, after the Adams presidency.
Yeah. Shall we move to polls, my guys?
For sure. That's a good discussion, and definitely leave comments or mention this on, reply to our comments at social media. Would love to hear your thoughts on this as well. I think we're getting to a point now where it's a little bit more open to talk about the political angle, but obviously here at Elections Daily, we're going to maintain respectful. We don't go into the hardcore partisan stuff, so we're not going to be approaching it from that angle as we breach the subject in the future. But polls, we had a lot of polls today. Some of them were good for Republicans, some of them were not. Specifically Texas. I know I've been hearing rumblings about this for a while. The Democrats were kind of losing a little bit of steam in the Sun Belt and gaining it in the Rust Belt. And what's seen is specifically Texas looking better for Republicans. Both of the Georgia Senate races seem to be all right. There was that Data for Progress poll that showed Warnock out in front, and I don't entirely discount that poll because they've been fairly accurate in Democratic primaries. Not been perfect, but fairly accurate. And so it's not impossible Democratic bases coalesced behind Warnock. But you had these polls out of the Rust Belt as well, which looked pretty good for Joe Biden, especially in Ohio, which people thought was kind of long gone at this point. Now, at Elections Daily, we've had Ohio for quite a while as a toss-up. In fact, I'll actually pull up our election ratings to give you an idea of where we see things. And I think our ratings have in time proven to be pretty prudent. There's not a whole lot of decisions I think we've made that I would say have been, without looking back on them, that I'd say we're wrong. We've had Texas as a toss-up for most of the cycle. We've had Ohio as a toss-up. If you look at the ratings right here, current toss-up states: Texas, Iowa, Ohio, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina. If I had to put an order of these, which ones Trump looks worst in, it would be probably Ohio and Iowa in that order, as being the top two of these, the most likely to go for Biden, which is kind of surprising, all things considering. I mean, people talked about a blue Georgia. We talked about a blue Georgia, blue Texas. Florida looks actually good for Trump, fairly good for Trump. And North Carolina is just not where Democrats want it to be.
Florida's Florida.
Yeah. I would say like part of this is that people have kind of underestimated how diverse of states the Sun Belt is compared to these Rust Belt states or these Midwestern states. For lack of a better term, Iowa is a very white state. It's a very ethnically homogeneous state. It's easy to have trends one way or the other. It's the same thing for Ohio. There's obviously a sizable African-American presence, places like Columbus and Cincinnati and Akron, Cleveland. But by and large, it's still a pretty minority. Most of it's predominantly white. There's not going to be a whole lot of cultural divides, whereas in North Carolina, Florida, Georgia, Texas, these are big states, not just big geographically. They're big in terms of population. They're big in terms of regions, media markets you have to compete in. To give you an idea of this, Jamie Harrison, who is running in South Carolina, is running ads in the Charlotte media market, which is like 4 counties in South Carolina. These ads are going all the way to Boone, North Carolina, which is on the border with Tennessee. This is the diversity we're talking about here, the number of media markets and the number of just the amount of money you have to spend. It would not surprise me at all if a hypothetical scenario where we just see all of these light blue states, except for maybe Pennsylvania, go Democratic, Iowa and Ohio go Democratic, and then one of these three, one of North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, go Democratic, but the rest stay Republican. That wouldn't surprise me at this point. I don't want to speculate too much, but what it's looked like is that Republicans are bouncing back in the Sun Belt to a degree and losing ground, specifically in Wisconsin, Ohio, Iowa. Michigan looks all right. Pennsylvania looks all right, but that's more of a northeastern state. Honestly, Ohio is the big concern here. The numbers are, we had 2 polls out today showing Biden ahead in Ohio, one from Fox News and one from Monmouth, I believe. You can't discount these polls. These are pretty good pollsters. It's not like Change Research coming in and saying that the Libertarian Indiana is getting 20% of the vote. These are actually good pollsters that are paying attention to these states now.
Hey, I'm sure Holcomb is at like 30%.
Look, but yeah, I'm gonna say this here though. We kind of saw this in Iowa and Ohio though with their 2 gubernatorial elections in 2018. Mm-hmm. Democrats Fred Hubble and Richard Cordray, both led within the final couple of polls by similar margins in their upcoming months, in the last couple of weeks and months. But what happened in the end was we saw Kim Reynolds win by 3 in Iowa, and we saw Mike DeWine win by 4 in Ohio. So, I think that there's something to be said. Obviously 2018 is a midterm. That's very different. Obviously, if Trump only won those states by 3 and 4 points, that would be bad news for him still, because that means he is still he is not reaching his same margins.
He's led to 6 to 7 points would basically be what it is.
Yeah. So he would be losing. He would be losing margins for sure in those states. Those would not be good for him. But I don't think either of these polls are to say, well, now maybe we can say Biden's favored in those 2 states. I would heavily plead caution on that right now, just because of what we learned, what we see, and what we saw in 2018. The polls missed Republicans in Iowa and Ohio a little bit in 2018. They were certainly still close races for sure, and I would certainly still not outlay the possibility of Biden winning in those two states. But I think we have, as analysis, we gotta tread caution. I think a little bit here, with how we see these states, how we remember them. I do agree with Eric, though. I do think that Republicans in the Sun Belt have seen, I wouldn't say a boost, whether it is more just the coalescing of the usual Republican vote.
Yeah.
I feel like certainly that Republicans, at least those who are undecided, have certainly started to come home. I certainly think you've seen that in Texas. I think you have definitely seen that in North Carolina. I think North Carolina in recent polling has been the most clear in that Republicans have coalesced back to Trump. And I would say even among Tom Tillis, those who are undecided have coalesced back to Republican candidates.
To some degree.
Not to some degrees, but certainly to certain degrees. If you want to average it out, Republicans, maybe it's not a boost, but they're certainly starting to coalesce, which is giving them this boost, and is certainly making them look at least better than what we maybe thought, back in August and July.
Yeah, and keep in mind, Democrats don't need any of these toss-up states. If they just win the states we have as leans Democratic, heck, they could even lose Arizona. They would have an electoral college majority. This is 280 votes. Arizona, I believe, takes that to 279. You could even lose Nevada or one of these states at that point. And with our totals at the moment, they would still have a majority of the electoral vote, or at least 269 votes. So it's like these purple states are important, but they're not the true battlegrounds right now. If Trump wants to win, he needs to win Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, places like that, Arizona especially, where polls have just been looking worse and worse for Republicans to a degree.
Arizona just seems to be the state, it seems to be the state where I would almost say it's maybe the second most likely Democratic flip right now. I'd argue maybe over Michigan being number one. The fact that the fact that you could theoretically put Arizona over Wisconsin and Pennsylvania right now as states that could flip back to Democrats. Barry Goldwater's rolling in his grave right now, to be totally honest.
Yeah, but I believe Dylan wanted to say something earlier about before I got into the toss-up stuff.
Yeah, sorry. I was just going to say, I haven't seen the same coalescing around Tillis that I have around Trump.
It's been, some of the polls say there's coalescing. Some of them say there isn't. I'm not exactly sure if it's a methodology problem or what, but it's been spotty. That's why we still have it as leans Democratic. We don't have it as a toss-up yet. I think at some point it might go back to it, although it's more likely to jump straight to leans R if something like that were to happen, because we're getting rid of these toss-up columns. I think we're going to lose, just as a spoiler, maybe one of these toss-up states in the next update. So like there's a degree of caution with North Carolina. I think it's more to the degree in Georgia, specifically around Kelly Loeffler, who has really stolen Doug Collins' lane. Obviously, you had the Attila the Hun ad, which, say what you will about it, it's funny, and it got attention, that ad firm seems to have majored in attention.
Yeah, it's very off-kilter, very attention grabbing. Also, I like that in the same graphic that has Kentucky as safe R, we have an ad for Amy McGrath.
But if we're going to talk about Senate races here, I think if there is any one Senate candidate who was more than happy today, it's David Perdue. If you're looking at polls today, I think David Perdue is very, very happy that polls are looking like that in the recent days. They show him outrunning Trump. They show him beating Ossoff right now by 6 or 5 points. David Perdue is very, very happy with today's polling results. Obviously, this is still a lean R seat, but some people were looking like maybe this seat could become a toss-up. I think recent polling definitely shows that it is most certainly a lean R seat. Perdue is certainly still favored. I think on the Republican side, he's probably the big winner.
I mean,
you want to say a Republican candidate who's won on the Senate side over these past couple of days of the polling, I would certainly say David Perdue was one of them.
Yeah, I mean, Ossoff underperforming, I'm shocked. He's never done that before in Georgia.
and I think that they showed favorability ratings, right, too? And for a guy who's never held office before, John Ossoff has surprisingly high unfavorability ratings. I think it was actually the same as David Perdue. They both had, I think, 38%. unfavorability ratings.
Yeah.
So you
Which
have
is
to
a problem.
wonder if there are still, because of how high profile and how much money was dumped in that 2017 special that he eventually lost to Karen Handel in 2017 in Georgia's 6th district. You got to wonder if some of those wounds are still there. I would certainly say, I could be misremembering this, but I believe he was still at for a guy who's never held office before to hold a 38% disapproval rating. That's something that has to be. That's something that kind of caught my eye as something that I think that has to be a little bit concerning for the Ossoff campaign.
Yeah. And I mean, on the other side, we've had that race as likely are for a while. The possibility of a lockout seems to be diminishing, but it's always there.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, like Warnock has started to spend. The campaign between Warnock and Lieberman has kind of been brutal in terms of people basically just begging Matt Lieberman to drop out, so there's not a lockout situation. Even if I'm not even sure if he drops out if it's possible, because it could go to another candidate, another one of those two candidates. But what's really fascinating to me is how Loeffler has not only overcome the political problem that was mentioned earlier, she has cast herself as the most conservative candidate in the race, the most conservative senator. And Collins seems to have basically just had to abandon that message. That was his initial campaign, is that Kelly Loeffler is a weak, spineless suburbanite. And whereas I am the true conservative and the true Trump supporter, Kelly Loeffler goes out there, votes with Trump 100% of the time, literally, and is like, well, you can't do that anymore. That was Collins's plan. That was the only thing he had, because his legislative record honestly isn't impressive. His district isn't particularly notable in terms of anything. And it's quite telling. The reaction to the Attila the Hun ad was not to contest that Kelly Loeffler is the most conservative senator. It was to present that Attila the Hun was a genocidal maniac who killed Christians. That's what's telling us, that he's not like, well, she's lying. She's not the most conservative. At this point, he really doesn't have a lot to go on her at. So if Republicans are coalescing around her, he can't run as the moderate because he's not a moderate. He doesn't have the record of a moderate. I don't know what path there is left for him, to be honest, to get through the primary.
No, I completely agree. Collins, I think, was the favorite when Loeffler's scandal broke, but she seems to have oddly been able to overcome that. That's a failing on both the Warnock, Lieberman, and Collins campaign.
Tucker Carlson was the only one that tried to take her to task on it. Like
everyone dropped the ball on that. Good job, guys. But Warnock has finally started campaigning, and my belief that on paper he was an incredibly strong candidate has seemingly been solidified by the fact that he just started campaigning and he's already pulling in second, third, and in a couple polls, like we mentioned, first place. You can't, I mean, the Data for Progress poll is strange, but throw it into the average and it still shows Warnock is going up. And I mean, you can tell the Lieberman campaign is nervous because now they're framing themselves as an outsider to the Atlanta power brokers, which is a very strange tactic.
I mean, that's what I believe who was the other candidate that was running against in Ossoff.
Teresa Greenfield.
Yeah. No, Teresa Greenfield is in Iowa, right?
You're right.
I know who you're talking.
Teresa Tomlinson. Yeah,
Tomlinson.
Teresa Tomlinson. Teresa Tomlinson, or whatever her name is, Tomlinson. She cast herself as the anti-Atlanta candidate, and she did very well outside of Atlanta. The problem is she did terribly in Atlanta, which happens to make up almost a majority of the state's population. This is about as wise as casting yourself as the anti-New York City candidate or the anti-Chicago candidate. It's at this point, I mean, it's really not a wise idea. But there's not a whole lot of lanes left open for him, aside from consolidating the white vote, I guess.
No, and it's a very Joe Kennedy move to call yourself an outsider while being part of one of the most powerful modern political dynasties.
For sure. But let's go over some other Senate. I think we've gone over, that as well. North Carolina, there's really not much to be said here. Neither candidate is doing a whole lot to make positive impressions of themselves. Depending on which poll you look at, the race is either even with Trump or a little bit behind Trump or very far behind Trump. We don't know. Maine is it's looking worse for Susan Collins for sure. Michigan is kind of a sleeper at this point because Democrats just they're dumping more money into Michigan at this point than any other state. They just dumped about $4.5 million into Michigan. It's not that the polling is bad. It's they can't seem to put Peters away, or they can't seem to put John James away. Peters has had a large polling lead for most of the campaign, and it's narrowed. Mainly because he's winning back Trump voters, or he's winning over them, whereas Peters is polling fine, but he's not been able to solidify this race yet. They really don't want a repeat of 2018, except on a scale of instead of going from a double-digit loss to a 6.1, where it goes from a 6-point loss to a win.
John James is surprisingly recovering. Gary Peters is a very generic candidate, as the NRSC keeps trying to remind us.
He's scrappy, but he doesn't have a whole lot to distinguish himself from. I mean, you couldn't pick him out of a lineup of senators. Like, no. I mean, he's only he's a meme at this point. He's less of a. I don't want to be too mean to the guy, but he's not well known at this point. He's a senator. He's been a senator for 6 years, almost, and he's running a Senate campaign, and he's doing fine. He's leading, but people are just voting for the Democrat. They're not voting specifically for Gary Peters.
He's the Democratic Tom Tillis, except Tom Tillis can't win his own base.
That's a fair. I don't hate that comparison, but I think if you've been watching Michigan polling over like the past 2 months, really the big thing that you can see here is that Peters just kind of stayed stagnant at around 48, 47, 46%, while James only grown from the high 30s to now the low to mid to now we're starting to see the low 40s. I mean, I believe even in that Data for Progress poll, those progress.
He's only down 5.
Yeah, he's only down 5, and you would expect those polls to be tilted slightly in favor, towards the Democrats just based on where they're coming from and everything.
Yeah, it certainly wasn't Kansas where they had Trump up by 4 statewide. Like, to give you an idea of some of the other ones, the other polls looked fine. The Kansas one was weird, but that was definitely striking from that poll.
Again, Data for Progress, while they have certainly been very good at Democratic primaries, they have been untested so far at the general election level. Again, like Dylan said about the Warnock poll being in the lead, the same thing with this one. You throw it on the average, but on average, John James is not going away. And if he outruns Trump again, he outran Bill Schuett by I think about 4 points. If he outruns Trump by 4 points in a general this year, that's a toss-up race. That is. I know that we cater a lot to the election Twitter brand, and I know on election Twitter, the Michigan is a toss-up. Michigan Senate race is a toss-up thing. Has kind of become a meme in its own right. But if we're playing cards like that, if James somehow ends up running past Trump by 4 points, that does mean that Michigan, by all means, is a toss-up state. At Senate level.
If you look at the national polls, even like apparently, literally, we were just talking about this. Emerson released a poll which had Trump Trump down by 3. Some people call them Memerson. They have an A- from the 538, but that's a little bit less than warranted. But it's more consistent with, being down by 5, that's more of a winnable race. There's still not any evidence that James is outrunning Trump with any significant group. For example, the Wayne County, or the Detroit Chamber of Commerce endorsed Gary Peters in re-election. John James is, of course, from Detroit. He's a notable businessman in the area. He's made Detroit a big message part of his campaign. But if I were Democrats, I think their money throwing here is warranted, to be sure.
Oh yeah, they're not putting James away, but I hear what you're saying, Joe, and I agree. It's probably closer than it was a month ago, but we can't assume James is going to outrun Trump by 4 points.
Sure.
So I would be very hesitant to call this a toss-up right now.
Definitely.
I'm not. I'm just saying that. I'm saying in that hypothetical that if John James he outruns the less popular Republican top of the ticket again, Bill Schuett in 2018, Donald Trump in 2018, Trump will probably not lose Michigan by as much as Shute did. So hey, I'm just putting out a hypothetical there.
Yeah, sure. Or here's another one to put it this way. Out of all the Republican Senate candidates that are in competitive seats, who is the most likely candidate to outrun Trump by any margin? It would probably be either Cory Gardner, who is not in a competitive race, or John James. That would be really the only two, I would think, out of all these that are
Susan
in a situation. Susan Collins, yeah, but Maine isn't a competitive state at the presidential level at this point, right? They're not contesting Maine. Whereas to some degree they are contesting North Carolina, Georgia, Montana, to some degree, Iowa, Texas. John Cornyn there. He's in the upper tier of candidates, basically, is what we're looking at. And
sure.
He's not shown the evidence of the crossover votes he's needed, but he's shown enough to not be counted out. Which Democrats had a chance to take him out. He was polling low. There were some controversial comments he said privately about LGBT issues, which they could have hammered on. They didn't. There's not been a whole lot they've gone after him for, which is kind of in hindsight, especially when Republicans were not contesting Michigan, we're not spending ads there. Seems like a missed opportunity.
Yeah.
But to go over a few other of the toss-ups real quick, just so we don't miss them, is Iowa is an enigma. Poll from the buzz we're hearing is that both Democrats and Republicans think Iowa is less competitive than polling shows, meaning it's more favorable to Republicans. Polls have been pretty good for at least for Teresa Greenfield, but the buzz on the ground doesn't seem to match the polling, if that makes any sense. And it's in a weird situation. There are more polls in Iowa that came out today showed Ernst running behind Trump. For what it's worth, if Trump wins Iowa, Ernst probably wins, but we're not seeing evidence that he's going to outrun him. And then Montana is an interesting one because Bullock's kind of fallen behind there a little bit. We moved it to toss-up fairly early, and Bullock led the first 5 polls or was tied. He tied in the first one, I believe, and then he led the other 4. Since then, there have been 5 polls over the last 2 months, and he's not led in a single one of them. And it seems like that's a race in particular that should be getting more attention. But it's really kind of seems to have solidified into somewhat of a lead for Daines. Whether that's enough for him to hang on is unknown. But those are the 2 toss-ups we have. We may see changes there at some point in the future, but we've narrowed it down to these 2 as probably the pivotal ones for Senate control. Because if you look at our map right now, what you notice here, 50 Democrats. That total is pretty big, but a 50-seat majority is basically useless. It's enough to get you the committee heads. It's enough to get you procedural votes on things everyone in your party agrees on. But as the previous Republican Congresses have shown, even a 54-seat majority can be hard to corral. 50 seats with a vice presidential tiebreaker is not enough to pass the sort of legislation Democrats want to pass. For that, they need 51 or 52, preferably probably 53. But at this point, if Republicans hold Iowa and Montana and all the other races here go accordingly, Senate control goes to the vice president's party, which I don't think is a scenario anyone wants, to be honest. I think you'd rather be solidly in a minority, even in a 51-seat minority, 51 to 49-seat minority. You're not in a position where it's just so awkward all the time. You need complete unanimity in favor of your party. That's just a strange situation to work with, I think.
I agree. I know we're running out of time here, but I just want to point this out to anyone who's watching and then you guys. Did anyone else see this Ogden and Fry poll of Illinois' 3rd congressional district that came out yesterday? It's a GOP internal, but this is really weird. This might be the weirdest internal I've seen all year so far.
Is it the one that had Newman only up by 2?
Yes, Marie Newman. GOP internal. Not only it has Marie Newman only up by 2. I think it still has Trump losing the district by a decent amount.
Yeah,
he lost by 15 last time.
I think so by like 11 here.
Ooh, that's actually not outside the realm of possibility.
By 10.
I mean, throw it in the average, but Newman's not going anywhere.
This poll I've seen all year. This is the weirdest internal I think I've seen all year, though.
Yeah, that's certainly weird. Actually, I wouldn't discount the possibility if future polling shows there of a race like that being competitive. We've already seen races like that with, I believe, the 10th district, which alternated between a moderate Republican and a moderate Democrat for a while, Bob Dole and Brad Schneider, before kind of settling on Schneider. But the thing with that district is that it is predominantly working class. It's only a Hillary plus 15 seat, which that's a big only, but that's basically roughly skews to what Illinois is, right? And frankly, there are a lot of blue collar voters there that has the Chicago firefighters in it. This is where they all live. If there's a district where in Illinois where you would expect Trump to make even a marginal gain, that would be the sort of district for it. The fact that the number is plus 10 is a little bit iffy. I mean, if you add it in there, that's plus 8. That takes a district that would be safely for Lipinski and makes it into one that's a likely for Newman. This is the sort of seat you watch in an off year, right? A 2022. Might I remind you, people who pay attention to Illinois politics know that off years for Democrats in Illinois can be brutal. The Republicans won a majority of the House districts in 2010 under a Democratic map. They won a Senate seat in 2010. They almost won the governor's office. If they hadn't nominated a social conservative, they probably would have won that office. And with that comes seats like this that are only D plus 6 PVI being a little bit more competitive. I would place a word of caution on this election, but when you have someone who's hardcore progressive like Newman in a seat that's frankly not drawn to be like that, that wouldn't shock me if she underperforms a little bit. As gets the long and short of things. And obviously it'll be redrawn next cycle. I can't imagine they'll keep that current arrangement because it was drawn specifically for.
Oh, we lost Eric.
Oh, well, we've had some issues with that, so hopefully we'll be back soon. But I know once there he is. He's
sorry. I was trying to screen share.
He's back, but yeah, weird things. I'm knocking that down as a weird internal right now. Personally.
Yeah, it's a weird internal. Yeah.
I'm just saying, So I'm knocking down as a weird internal right now. I know the weirdest one I've ever seen was when I think it had like Mark Callahan up by like 21 points or like 19 points against Mark Gamba in Oregon's last election.
That was a Gravis poll. Yeah, that was a Gravis poll.
But I think we're running out of time here, guys. So if everyone's fine, close. Unless you want to go over something, I don't have an issue staying on a little bit longer. But if we all want to go off, that's fine.
Yeah, I think we covered
everything.
All right, sounds good then. So thank you guys for watching this week. This is a good episode. Definitely appreciate your support. If you haven't already, like and subscribe to the channel. We really appreciate your support. Click the bell icon if you haven't already. In fact, make sure you click it to not just click to subscribe, but also click that you're getting notifications, all notifications, not the personalized notifications, which in practice just they tell you a day later that someone uploaded, which frankly isn't very useful at all. But we appreciate your support. You can find us. You can find our social media handles in the description of the podcast or YouTube video that you're watching. But with that, I think we'll wrap up for tonight, and we'll see you next week. I think, or actually, no, we might not see you next week. I'll have to update you guys on the status for that. But thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Okay, excellent.